We might even be able to like have treatments that, can remove microplastics from our bodies, fusion power, clinical immortality. Every American citizen, everybody working on American technology, they will be held legally liable if they misuse quantum computers. Like it could be US, it could be the Chinese. We are working very hard on this very serious problem. We think it is the most serious concern that people have raised about Bitcoin.
How much time do we have?
That is the million-dollar question.
My guest today is Hunter Beast, the author of BIP 360, a Bitcoin improvement proposal for quantum resistance. We talked about quantum computers, the potential threat they pose to Bitcoin, and of course his proposed solution. But before we get started, I want to mention that today's video is sponsored by CryptoSnake Deals. On the CryptoSnake Deals page, you'll find the best discounts on hardware wallets, crypto gear, and conference tickets. Check it out, the link in the description. Thank you so much, Hunter, for taking the time to be here. Like many Bitcoiners, I have a lot of questions about quantum computers in general, and of course about the potential Q day. But before we dive in, could you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah, so I go by Hunter Beast. It's a pseudonym just because it's better to do development with as much anonymity as possible, especially in this space, in Bitcoin space. I've been working full-time in Bitcoin since 2021. I turned my full attention to Bitcoin in 2021 because I read the Bitcoin Standard and I became convinced that if I were to spend my time on anything other than Bitcoin, it would essentially be a waste of time. I was starting to get into layered development like Lightning and RGB. I did a lot of Rust layer development for a while. And then last year, I joined Nara to work on the Andro sidechain platform. They needed some protocol engineering expertise, and also they were interested in my work on BIP 360.
Before we jump to BIP 360, let's talk about quantum computers in general. Let's start with the basics. For people who aren't familiar, what exactly is a quantum computer and how does it work?
Yeah, so in the 80s, Richard Feynman, he came up with the idea, the theory behind quantum computers as we know them today. And essentially, he realized that we could model, not just model, but like make use of fundamental physical phenomena in the fundamental operation of computation. Things like diffraction and interference patterns, like things that make use of fundamental quantum physics. We can use that to accelerate computation, especially with things like quantum Fourier transform, which can explore large, what are called Hilbert spaces or large problem spaces in parallel, in massively parallel. In about 2000, cryptographers and physicists had put their heads together enough to realize that quantum computers could pose a threat to cryptography. And the NSA, it turns out, was like, you don't say, you know? And and then in 2013, after the Snowden leaks, Edward Snowden, he used to work for the NSA, and he brought a lot of documents to light on programs that were concerning. And one of those concerning programs was called Penetrating Hard Targets. And it turns out that they had been working on a quantum computer that was cryptographically relevant. And they had been, even in 2013, they were spending already $80 million a year on that program. We believe it was directed to at least one or two military defense contractors, one of them being Honeywell. And they spun out their like quantum computing division. I think they call it Quantinuum now. And then there's also Raytheon. I think that they both work using what are called neutral atoms, and they just use like lasers to trap them and entangle them. That's one way. It's a little slower, but they've been able to get pretty good high enough qubit counts and hold them for like, I think one of the latest papers I've seen from this year was 23 minutes of continuous operation. which is actually really good. Essentially, what you can do then, once you have enough qubits, and it turns out you don't need a lot, like, to break the kind of cryptography that Bitcoin uses. Bitcoin uses
We will jump to the specifics. Let's do a few steps back. Could you please explain the fundamental difference between bits and qubits, maybe a little more on the superposition, and why do we need logical qubits? Also, like the difference between physical and logical qubits.
Yeah, that's a great question. Basically, qubits can store information in superposition, which means that they can encode more information in a single qubit than you can encode in a single bit in a classical bit. There are ways to, like, I think they call it super dense coding or something. You could actually, like, really compress information to a single qubit that way. You can also entangle multiple qubits together and use them to model a system in its entirety in every possible state it can exist within, and you set the state that you're interested in, say like a public key, and then you have to, like, create a lot of logic gates that will then essentially uh, sort of play these qubits off of each other using different operations, like things like Toffoli gates, which are essentially like triple input controlled not gates. The fundamental, like, logical operations of, like, Boolean logic do exist in quantum computing, but they're sort of like contingent upon probabilistic inputs, uh, and everything kind of exists within a probabilistic state until it's measured.
And can you please explain, like, back to the logical qubits, what problems do they solve, and what solutions and machines do the leading companies currently have?
Basically, that the problem is, like, with qubits, they have a problem with coherence and noise. The state can be disrupted if there's not enough noise isolation, and there are different ways that can be used to mitigate against that. One is quantum error correction codes. Google Willow, from late last year, they came up with a massive improvement in the number of physical qubits needed to construct a logical qubit, and they used essentially machine learning in order to, like, in that process of error correction codes, and they were able to reduce the number of logical qubits required to construct a physical qubit, and so I think it's about, like, maybe 50 or 100 are needed now.
50,
uh
50 physical to have one logical, right?
Exactly. There's also there was some excitement about Microsoft's research on Majorana fermions, and these are essentially like a quasi particle that's constructed using things we already understand. Majorana fermions can or particles behaving like Majorana fermions can be constructed using superconducting quantum computers. And like, the thing that's really attractive about that is that they are highly resistant to noise in ways that, like, traditional superconducting quantum computers, like ones that depend on Josephson junctions and just low temperature computing, they maybe work at you're lucky if you get maybe 50 watts out of these CPUs, and that's a lot of cryogenic um, like power being put into that, like multiple kilowatts. These machines are very expensive to build and very expensive to run. They cost billions of dollars and cost millions an hour, probably. And so,
What is the most powerful quantum computer do we currently have?
there's a couple, like, there's definitely, like, a few that are making use of neutral atoms, like the defense contractors are doing, that are pretty far along. And then also, I think worthy of mention is the work that Cyquantum is doing. They use, like, optical computing, like Mach-Zehnder interferometers and ring resonators, and they connect this with just, like, ordinary optical fiber, and then what they have to cool is the detector. They have like photon generators and detectors, and they are able to scale this in a way that is unique from most other approaches, in that they don't use dilution refrigerators or cryostats that are like kind of like bell shaped. They hang from the ceiling. That's like the more traditional design. They've sort of evolved that design into something that looks a lot more like almost like a big metal refrigerator with lots of little like arrays of grids for allowing for the installation of multiple parallel quantum computing modules. They usually have to site with like extremely expensive and powerful cryogenic cooling equipment, because these computers require, in order to cool them to near absolute zero to maximize coherence, in order to do that, they need to use two cryogenic coolants, liquid nitrogen and liquid helium.
What's the purpose of these machines? Can people cure, HIV and cancer
Yeah,
with the help of these machines?
so there's kind of three stages of quantum computing. There's what they call noisy intermediate scale quantum computers. Actually, there's things that predate that, right? There's like prototypes and stuff. It's kind of like debatable whether we're entering the era of NISQs. Eventually, somebody might be able to make use of an NASQ in such a way that creates, especially something like post processing, especially like GPUs alongside the quantum computer, that might elevate it to might be enough to elevate it to what's called a cryptoanalytically or cryptographically relevant quantum computer. And then finally, we have the mythical fault-tolerant quantum computer, which is essentially not much different from a software perspective to classical computers, just that they are able to also perform quantum calculations. Like there are some really good potential uses for this technology, like optimization of fusion power plants, and also quantum machine learning, because they're both probabilistic. That maps well. One of one of the things I'm most excited about is quantum chemistry, because that can be used to create, say, like enzymes for forever chemicals or microplastics, and we might even be able to like have treatments that can remove microplastics from our bodies through proteins, and that are modeled accurately and exactly through quantum computing processes, because like you can model these like molecules like on the chip in through software, taking advantage of physical processes, then essentially makes them more useful. But then
Can humans become immortal?
there's a lot of work actually being done on like rejuvenation and Yamanaka factors, and there's even like some work that's been done on monkeys, that like there's apparently some treatment they can do that can age the body backwards 20 years, which is very exciting and interesting. But yeah, I mean, quantum computers and are essentially one of those things that can be paired alongside AI. And I think maybe within 10 years we should have access to a lot more than we have now. I mean, like fusion power, clinical immortality, things like ectogenesis, which I think is pretty exciting. Also, like future technology, we should have sort of like be on the well on our way there within 10 years.
That's
But
fascinating.
before you get to all that, though, unfortunately, one of the easier things you can do with the quantum, one of the simpler things you can do, is factor large numbers. And
Well, let's talk about Bitcoin then.
yeah, yeah.
Let's move on to Bitcoin. I'm sure you've seen the scary headlines. Quantum computers will break Bitcoin. If that is possible, what parts of Bitcoin are actually at risk?
Yeah, so in Bitcoin Talk, they've been talking about this since 2012. There are conversations that go back that far. And I mean, and in the cryptography community, it's been known since for even longer that elliptic curve cryptography would be one of the first targets for quantum computers, because there's fewer qubits needed for just to keep the integers, and also it like to store the state for them, and also it's just like problem that maps well, what they call the discrete log problem, that maps well to what's can be solved with what's called Shor's algorithm.
Can you please explain to people who have no idea about Shor's, what is Shor's algorithm? How does
Yeah,
it work?
yeah. So Shor's algorithm essentially pairs quantum Fourier transform, which I mentioned earlier, with the modular arithmetic oracle that can essentially find what's called periodicity. And so it essentially finds patterns in a sea of noise. And what it'll do is essentially make use of quantum interference, constructive interference, to find like the wrong answers will cancel each other out, and then there'll be like kind of like a ridge or a peak potential solutions. And then what the quantum computer will do is it'll spit out a bunch of candidates that could be private keys. And what you do then is you will multiply each key by the generator point to produce a public key, and then you just see if that was the same public key you entered as the input. And if those both match, then you've essentially found the private key that matched to a public key, which essentially breaks elliptic curve cryptography, unfortunately.
And how powerful would a quantum computer need to be in theory, like to run Shor's algorithm? Like,
Originally we thought it would take 1,500 qubits for a 256-bit number, but through some advancements in understanding the problem, we realized that actually it only requires 3 times the number of qubits, not 6 originally. And so now I think the lower bound is 768
wow.
qubits. Yeah. And
Like, how much time do we have?
that is the $1,000,000 question. That's why I've been like researching this and dedicating all of my time to it. I'm working full time on this problem, especially in terms of solving it for Bitcoin.
Like, what is the worst and best scenario?
I think the worst case scenario could be within 2 to 3 years we'll see something wrong.
What does it mean? We'll see like Satoshi's coins like being sold on what? On a DEX? Like,
Well, maybe, or like I think that the surest sign, like aside from like say, so there's actually Taz Dreja, he's a famous Bitcoin core dev. He actually OG, he explained that there's actually a Bitcoin script. A script is the Bitcoin contract language. He came up with a script that was quite short. It basically all I have to do is take the like an ordinary Bitcoin locking script and then insert SHA-256 between the public key and checksum verify. And so basically what that does is it makes it so you have to commit to a hash of a public key. And then that means that the only way to sign for that message to unlock that script is if you have a quantum computer that can derive a public key for that. Basically you have to like, or the private key for the hash of the public key in order to sign it, which is something we can't do with classical computers. And so there's like a very concise script that if you can spend it, you've proven to everyone that Bitcoin is compromised. You can also spend one of Satoshi's coins. We actually pointed to a specific UTXO. We call it the Canary. It's basically the block after the Genesis, the first block, which is block 1. I mean, not block 0. Block 0 is Genesis, and that's unspendable. But block 1, there's a UTXO for the block reward for that. It's 50 Bitcoin. Basically, the first spendable UTXO, if you can spend that, that is also quite a public signal. But before we get to that, I think we'll see the US government, which is the furthest along in quantum computing. I think what they might do is they will have to make an announcement, and that announcement is essentially a directive to every American citizen, everybody working on American technology, that they will be held legally liable if they misuse quantum computers.
oh well, I want to talk more about the government, but first let's talk more about the addresses. Which Bitcoin addresses are actually vulnerable? Like, and how many coins could be at risk of being stolen by a quantum computer? Are we talking about Satoshi era coins only?
Yeah, so There's a good project called Project 11, and they make a what they call a Bitcoin risk list that I think has something like 6 million coins that are vulnerable. What makes a coin vulnerable is just that there's a public key exposed on the blockchain, and this is what they call long exposure attacks. This is a term we came up with in BIP 360. Actually, it's kind of novel because we realized that the kind of quantum computer that you need to execute a long exposure attack is actually dramatically smaller than or less powerful, less power is needed if you have all the time in the world to work on that public key. You could, task a quantum computer for days or weeks or months, and of course, it gets very expensive to operate a quantum computer for that long, especially nowadays. But eventually, it'll get cheaper. There's also short exposure attacks, which are essentially attacks on coins in flight, like in the mempool that haven't been mined yet, and that requires a probably like 100 times more powerful quantum computer, maybe even more, to do it in a timely fashion. And even then, you risk like the miner getting a block immediately right as you're trying to mine the coin, or like drive the public key for those coins. And so that's definitely a further out problem. And Bitcoin already, the majority of Bitcoins, 2/3 majority, are resistant to quantum computers because their public keys are hashed and not available on chain. Whereas, but there's about 6 million that are vulnerable, and then of those 6 million,
Just to confirm, so I use a Trezor hardware wallet, and it creates new address. I think it's called native SegWit, right? It creates a new address every time I receive or send coins. So those addresses are not at risk, right? So
right, if they start with like BC1Q, then they are not at risk unless you spend from them and then receive more coins to the same address that you used before. Because whenever you spend your coins, you have to reveal your public key, and we call that address reuse.
let's say I copy my zPub public address. I don't share it anywhere. However, I use it in a portfolio tracker application like CoinStats. Is that still safe, assuming the app doesn't leak my information?
I mean, well, the problem with a zPub or an XPub is like basically what they call an extended public key, or like there's some other implementations of that are like called zPubs. I think Electrum uses that. The problem with that is a public key, and it's used to derive all your other public keys, which then could be compromised by quantum computers that are could be then used to drive the private keys to your addresses.
Let's say I don't spend anything, I just copied it and use it in my portfolio tracker. But I guess the only risk is if that information is leaked, right?
Yeah, but the problem is like I think it's like 90% of all companies in the US have like lost data in the past. Like if you put data out there, unfortunately, like the reality of cybersecurity is that it's very likely that it will eventually become public information.
I'd like you to address a few misconceptions about the quantum computer threat. My favorite is this one. If a quantum computer is powerful enough to break Bitcoin, it will also be powerful enough to break all banking systems and even nuclear codes. So Bitcoin shouldn't be the first priority. Can you explain why that statement is incorrect?
Well, I mean, it's true, but the problem with that is banking, if like the financial infrastructure and nuclear power plants or ICBMs, like all that infrastructure is something that is maintained by people in authority that can then hire experts to fix any problems that come about, and they can also shut them down and put them back in the state they were. And so they can even, like in the financial system, even they can reverse transactions, they can rewrite their ledger, they can freeze Swift, transfers and that sort of thing. Like the whole financial system these days it's not based on an immutable ledger. It's very loosey goosey and very like controlled by the authorities, which are essentially central banks, and so they get to decide what the ledger is, what everybody's accounts are, and they can legally essentially reverse things that they decide are criminal. And so the problem is we can't do that with Bitcoin. That's not something we have built into Bitcoin.
I just wanted to add that with nuclear systems, they all are air gapped. So
Yeah, well, yeah, well, without a doubt, and also they intentionally use like older technology, like even like 8-inch floppy disks, because they know that is essentially it sort of predates the internet, though technically the internet was TCP/IP was first designed in the 1960s to network mainframes in the event of a distributed systems that was designed intentionally to tolerate faults that could arise during a nuclear conflict. And so TCP/IP also is highly resilient against that kind of scenario, and as a result, like Bitcoin nodes are also quite resilient, because there's tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin nodes out there already that are keeping an exact copy of the blockchain, and it'll be very distributed even in the case of, say, an EMP or a Carrington event or mass ejection, or like these are all kind of the same thing, but or also like a global thermonuclear war event.
now let's talk about Bitcoin and BIP 360. Can you tell us more about the existing Bitcoin improvement proposals, and how is BIP 360 different from the others?
Yeah, so BIP 360 is actually, we've been working on this for over a year now. It's probably the most mature of all the proposals out there. It addresses the singular problem of signatures, which go to your address, whereas it does not address things like mining. A different quantum algorithm is actually needed for breaking how SHA-256 works. It's called Grover's algorithm. It's much less efficient, and I don't think, I could be wrong, but like I think it'll be a very long time, maybe multiple decades, before we see quantum computers powerful enough to run Grovers in a meaningful way. So I'm not so worried about SHA-2. I think SHA-2 will last for a long time. And so anyway, BIP360, all that does is it takes the latest Bitcoin soft fork upgrade called Taproot, and it fixes a vulnerability in Taproot addresses that essentially, Taproot addresses are essentially public keys. They're just tweaked with an additional piece of data that comes from like alternative ways to spend it. In Taproot, there's paid Taproot addresses. They have basically two ways you can spend it. One is called the key path spend, and one is called the script path spend. The script path spend is essentially like a Merkle tree of scripts that you can then selectively spend based on like what the Merkle path is and the hashes. You give the alternative script hash. And there's also the key path spend, and so there's something called the internal key, and that is derived by your wallet. When it goes to generate the address, along with any other scripts that you want to put into the script path spend and commit to in the tap tweak, and then it'll tweak that key with elliptic curve math and like you have tweak add and tweak mul. So like the address that it commits to is a key. It's just tweaked with another factor, and but that said, you can just kind of ignore that and spend it with a key path spend if you can derive a key for what's committed to. I think you could spend that just by revealing a public key. What BIP360 does is it essentially takes the elliptic curve cryptography public key stuff out of Taproot address generation, completely disables the key path spend. It's not something that you can do with a BIP360 address. And now we call this a P2 tap script hash. It used to be called P2 quantum resistant hash, but we had to change the name to P2 TSA. And then it will start with a BC1Z. Native SegWit starts with BC1Q. Taproot starts with BC1P. This would start with BC1Z, which is SegWit v2. And then we also originally proposed calling it BC1R, but that would be SegWit version 3, and there were some maintainers who did not like that we're skipping a version number just to get the R. So we thought it would be helpful to have like a mnemonic to remember, well, this is a resistant address, but unfortunately that's not something we're probably going to run with at this point.
let's talk about Hourglass. What is this? Like, can you please talk
Oh
more?
yeah, so BIP360 is like it solves a very specific problem in Bitcoin, and it does make it more quantum resistant, but it doesn't solve every problem that is introduced by quantum computers. There's another problem, which is essentially the liquidity of Satoshi coins and other P2PK coins. There's 1.7 million of them, and that could be a big problem if those were to become suddenly liquid. Like, for example, there's kind of like imitation game style game theory behind introduction of cryptographically relevant quantum computers, and an attacker could potentially derive as many private keys as they could before it's ever confirmed or revealed that Bitcoin is unsafe. And there could be a scenario where they have enough time to derive all of the keys to all those 1.7 million coins that are essentially unclaimed property at this point. Like they could legally probably take all of those if they wanted to, because they're like over 10 or 12 years old now, and so I think they might be able to make a legal case. Then they could just liquidate those all at once, and it would only take a number of I think it would only take maybe 6 or 8 blocks. Like it's only an hour or two worth of blocks to move all those coins at once. And what Hourglass aims to do essentially is to spread out that liquidation. So there's Hourglass v1 and Hourglass v2. Hourglass v1 essentially all it does is it says that if this is an older pay to public key address that's being spent from, the coins in those you can only include one of those inputs in a block at a consensus level. So miners can only select the highest fee paying input when it's being spent, so long as it's P2PK. So, and then V2 takes it a step further to try to adjust all 6 million coins, but that is a much more complicated proposal because it requires what's called an address index, which is not something that's built into Bitcoin. Ethereum EVM chains, they have like their account space, so they kind of like keep track, they accumulate an index of the number of coins in every address. Whereas in Bitcoin, that's not something that happens in Bitcoin, like in the actual core index itself or the core node. The most it has is a transaction index, but not an address index. And so, and that's only maybe that's an optional feature. Indexes aren't really like necessarily built into the core node itself, and but it would be required to sort of like track things like address reuse and prevent that. The thing about that sort of thing is I'm not so sure that's as necessary, because about 90% of the coins that are held in reused addresses have recent movements, like within the last 6 months, and so there's very likely an owner behind them that will take active measures to protect those coins. And so I'm not convinced that we need to go through all the technical complexity of Hourglass v2 in order to do that. And so I think Hourglass v1 could be a viable scenario for us to use if we wanted to protect Bitcoin enough, as long as we also have BIP360 activated. And yeah, so there's and additionally, BIP360 also technically doesn't include post quantum cryptography, but we're working on BIPs that implement things like Sphinx or SLH DSA that could be used as post quantum cryptography signature algorithms that can be activated in wallets and also on in nodes, maybe in the same soft fork or something like it, and then we'll be able to. And what that does is that protects you against short exposure attacks, like mempool attacks. But again, I'm not as concerned about those kind of attacks. I'm more concerned about the long exposure attacks of just public keys that are available on chain.
Let's talk about your tweet. A couple of weeks ago, you said, "Is now a bad time to announce we have done a BIP 360 transaction on Signet?" Do we already have a working solution?
Yeah, we have some So in my GitHub, I've been working with a team here at Andro at Mara. They're employed by Mara, and I was like paid by Mara to work on the Andro sidechain platform with me. We have a quantum working group, the Andro quantum working group. There are two other developers besides me that are helping with various things like the changes to Bitcoin Core, changes to Rust Bitcoin, other dependencies, BDK, TypeScript, libraries for wallets. We're implementing something called Bitcoin PQC, which is a project that I came up with that essentially adds multiple kinds of post-quantum cryptography. Yeah, we have a signet and a mempool explorer that we have not yet announced, but we will be doing so at TabConf, which will be happening within about 2 weeks or about a week and a half in Atlanta. We'll be holding a workshop on essentially people will be able to download an experimental what's called Signet wallet, and Bitcoin Signet is essentially like a test net, but it's run by just one party. And we'll have a faucet. We'll have like a way for people to receive coins to their wallet, and then they will be able to spend them using post quantum signatures using SLHDSA.
Yeah, that's awesome. Like, how can community help speed up the process of like who are the stakeholders? What should be done? What are the next steps?
Yeah, so we have a newsletter. You can find it at bit360.org. You can find a bunch of information there in addition to a sign up link to our newsletter on Substack that we release every month, or roughly every month, at 1 or 2 months. I think that the most actionable step is just to go to bit360.org, do some reading. And I think the most important thing for people to take away from this interview is just that we are working very hard on this very serious problem. We think it is the most serious concern that people have raised about Bitcoin. We're building solutions. We're working on being prepared, and we just want people to be prepared, not scared about the issue.
I want to talk about the government because quantum computers are so advanced. It's not like I can install it in my house, right? It seems like this technology will be controlled mainly by governments. So when we talk about decision makers and potential bad actors, we're really thinking about governments, right? Who could be the number one suspect? CCP? Like,
Well, so like it's interesting because like a lot of the research that comes out of the CCP on quantum computing isn't as high quality as what we see from the West. So it's unclear exactly how far along they are. But in the US, like we have billions of dollars being spent on the technology every year. And we have multiple dozens, if not hundreds, of companies and startups working on this technology. It's problematic for with regards to Bitcoin because Bitcoiners are used to a mantra we say don't trust to verify, and unfortunately, quantum computing is not sovereign computing. It is, in fact, like it's only for nation states, and right now, it's very experimental, research oriented. There might be some rogue startups, because like I don't know if Microsoft or IBM or maybe
yeah, I doubt they would.
I don't think you're gonna have to go after Bitcoin, right? But there are startups like Quantum that I actually asked their CEO directly, like in person. We met at an event in San Francisco at Presidio Bitcoin, and there were a number of really good talks there on the topic if people are curious. But I asked him, like, will he use your technology to attack Bitcoin? And privately, he told me that essentially he would not, like, he wouldn't because he was worried that it would jeopardize his contracts with the government. But the thing is, if the U.S. government ever asked him to attack Bitcoin, like if they ever paid him to do
So if
that,
it, like in theory, if we have a new administration,
yeah,
uh,
or even this administration.
oh yeah,
Yeah, like if for example they pass a bill for like a strategic Bitcoin reserve and they want to get as much Bitcoin as possible, they could approach Cyclonum and other companies like it and say, we have a bounty on these coins and we would like to purchase them at a discount and we'll pay you to operate your quantum computers to take them and put them in the reserve. That is a possibility. That is a very real possibility at this point. Like I can imagine like a world that a universe in which that happens pretty easily. And at which point, yeah, that could be like it could be US, it could be the Chinese, it could be and here's the other thing. There's not enough investment in quantum computing in Europe or Russia. There's not a lot of superpowers other than just China and US that are really on the forefront of this technology, unfortunately. For sure, unfortunately, but yeah. Basically, it's either going to be one of the companies in the US, especially like a startup, or it could be like one of the Chinese state.
So what is CNSA time frame? What is this? Like Commercial National Security Algorithm Suite 2.0?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. There's a timeline. There's like it goes like from 2028 where they need to start really having undergone a lot of the transition. By 2030, no new systems should be in the government that use elliptic cryptography or RSA. And then in 2035, we need to have completely sunset all existing systems that make use of elliptic cryptography and RSA. So that's in 10 years.
Well, the final question, I guess, is how can plebs like me help BIP 360? How can we speed up the process?
Yeah, so there's a couple things you can do. One is BIP360.org, sign up for a Substack. If you want, you can donate through either Substack or if you go to surmount.systems, we have some Bitcoin donation links. We only accept silent payments and Bolt 12 payments. That's because we don't want to reuse addresses and we want to be prepared. That's also one reason we don't use Nostr either, which is like a Bitcoin-oriented social media platform, is because all identities are based on public keys and we just can't trust that. And so we don't want to be a source of truth during a potential scenario there.
Hunter, thank you so much again for joining us today. This was a great conversation and I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you.
I'ma keep it a stack. People doubted my talent, really just wanted me to react. Perseverance ain't what I lack. Haters see you've got potential, then they've got something against you. Always have an opinion and hoping that it offends you. I just